A haughty millionaire personally went to evict families from a plot of land where he planned to build his next shopping center. But when he arrived, he saw a woman who made him freeze in his tracks. It was his ex-wife, and beside her, 3 children bearing his own face. From that moment on, everything he thought he controlled began to crumble. His name was Alejandro Torres, and when power and money were mentioned in Mexico City, it was hard not to remember him. Owner of one of the largest construction companies in the country, Alejandro was the type of man who could buy anything he wanted or have anyone in his way removed. At 48, he had more properties in his name than memories that truly mattered. His life was all about schedules, meetings, figures, and silence. But none of that prepared him for what he was about to discover on an ordinary afternoon while personally supervising the eviction of an illegal settlement on a newly acquired plot of land. It was a modest piece of land in an area that would soon become upscale, thanks to the project for a new luxury shopping center. But first, the families living there in makeshift houses had to be removed. Alejandro arrived at the site with his usual cold detachment, surrounded by lawyers, engineers, and security guards. He ordered that the shacks be emptied by the end of the day, without exception. "They're trespassers, nothing more," he said, not meeting anyone's eyes. Yet, as he walked among the precarious structures, something caught his attention. A woman stood at the door of one of the houses, holding a child in her arms with 2 others by her side. She didn't move. She didn't retreat. There was something familiar about her. Perhaps it was her eyes, or the way she stood so firmly, even in the face of such contempt all around. Alejandro furrowed his brow, uneasy at an unfamiliar feeling. And then she spoke, in a firm yet calm voice. "Maybe you've forgotten me, Alejandro, but I haven't forgotten what you did." He froze. That voice, that woman, it was impossible. But it was her, Luciana, his ex-wife, the woman he had abandoned without a backward glance 10 years ago. His heart raced, not out of longing, but out of fear of what was about to be revealed. He tried to maintain his composure. "What are you doing here?" he asked, as if he still had any right over her life. Luciana offered a slight, sorrowful smile and simply pointed to the 3 boys at her side. "Living and raising my children." Alejandro's world stopped. 3 children, 3 boys with the same dark hair, the same determined expression, just like him. There was no doubt. It was as if the past had come back to collect its due with interest and penalties. And there, in the midst of dust and neglect, Alejandro realized that this land hid something he could never buy: the truth. The silence was overwhelming. Neither the lawyers nor the security guards dared utter a word. Alejandro felt the ground slip away beneath his feet. He tried to argue, to rationalize, but all he could manage was a flat, "This can't be true." Luciana, with the serenity of someone who had cried enough, replied without raising her voice, "You left me alone, without warning, without explanation, without looking back. And when I found out I was pregnant, it was already too late." The 3 boys moved closer to her, as if they instinctively sensed that something was wrong. They didn't know who that man was, but he knew exactly who they were. Alejandro took a step back, completely unmoored. His eyes shifted between the children's faces, trying to deny the obvious. They were like mirrors of his youth, the same nose, the same determined gaze, even the way one of them folded his arms exactly like he did. "You should have looked for me," he murmured, more out of wounded pride than genuine regret. But Luciana didn't let it pass. "And for what? So you could say they weren't yours? So you could silence me with a check and go on with your life?" She was right. He knew it. And for the first time, his arrogance had no effect. People began to gather around, community residents, construction workers, curious onlookers. It was like watching a soap opera scene in broad daylight. But for Alejandro, it wasn't fiction. It was the past coming back to collect with interest. "You all need to leave this land," he still tried to say, as if clinging to protocol could protect him. Luciana looked around, then at her children. "We're leaving, yes, but not because of fear of you. We're leaving because I don't want my children growing up thinking that power can buy everything. Not dignity, not memory, not love." At that moment, one of the children, the youngest, who couldn't have been more than 6, pulled at the hem of Luciana's blouse and whispered something. She stooped down, listened, and smiled sadly. "He wants to know who you are," she said, looking directly at Alejandro. The millionaire felt a knot in his throat. He wanted to speak. He wanted to answer, but he didn't know how. His name didn't belong there, neither did his money or his fame. For the first time in his life, he felt the real weight of having disappeared from someone's life. And worse, from the lives of 3 people who never asked for it. Alejandro slowly stepped away, as if he needed air. His mind was in chaos. The image of Luciana with her children stabbed at his conscience like a knife. He never imagined that she could be living under such conditions. And worse, he had never even bothered to imagine what might have happened to her after the divorce. In his world, things ended with a signature. The rest was someone else's problem. But now, faced with those innocent faces bearing his traits, he realized he had left behind far more than just a failed marriage. In his armored truck, Alejandro stared at his own reflection in the tinted glass. He didn't recognize himself. For the first time in years, he felt shame. Not for the scandal. He knew how to handle that, but for his cowardice, for his absence, for his lack of humanity. It was as if life had slapped him in the face. Live in front of everyone. He picked up his cell phone, opened the gallery, and saw that he didn't even have a photo of Luciana. Nothing to prove that she had ever been his wife. He erased everything, even the history. And now, she returned with living proof that walked, talked, and looked just like him. That night, he couldn't sleep. The image of the children wouldn't leave his mind. He wanted to know their names, their ages, what they liked to eat. He imagined if they were in school, if they had somewhere to play, if they had ever gone hungry. And worst of all, he knew they had, that they had probably faced all of it. While he flew in private jets, they might have been sharing the same old mattress in a wooden and zinc house. It was late, but he knew he couldn't keep ignoring it. For the first time in a long while, he felt something he hadn't felt in years: responsibility. The next day, he returned to the plot of land, without security, without the press, without a lawyer. He arrived in simple clothes, in an ordinary car, and asked to speak with Luciana. She hesitated upon seeing him, suspicious. But he didn't come with promises, not with checks either. He came with questions. Are they okay? Do they go to school? Do they need anything? She crossed her arms as if expecting a trap. Why now, Alejandro? Are you going to kick us out again? Or are you going to take away what little I still have? He lowered his head. I don't know. But I wanted to start by asking what I never asked you. How did you manage on your own? And for the first time, she hesitated. Luciana took a deep breath and invited Alejandro inside. The house was modest, built with whatever was available: reclaimed wood, a zinc roof, hand-sewn curtains. But it smelled like home. It had life. The children played with building blocks scattered on the floor. Alejandro entered, slowly taking it all in. He saw drawings taped to the wall, a patched-up school backpack, a calendar with marked dates, vaccinations, parent meetings, school fairs. Nothing there was beautiful in the eyes of luxury, but everything screamed effort. This didn't just fall from the sky, she said. I built it, every detail, even when you pretended we never existed. They sat at the kitchen table. Alejandro was visibly uncomfortable, but he didn't try to hide it. "Why did you never come looking for me?" he asked sincerely. Luciana gave a slight sideways smile. "Because I knew that back then you weren't a man meant to be a father, nor to look back." The phrase cut like a knife, but he accepted it. He knew it was true. "Did you get involved with someone?" he asked in an almost childlike tone. She looked him in the eye. "I didn't have time for that, Alejandro. I had 3 children to raise, and none of them took your name, nor received a single cent from you, but they got everything I could give, my presence." He fell silent. The weight of her words was too great to argue with. Luciana continued, "I don't want your money. If you come with the intention of buying back what you lost, you can leave now." Alejandro raised his hands as if surrendering. "I didn't come to buy anything. I came to understand, and if you'll allow it, to participate." She let out a soft laugh. "You think it works like that? Participate how? Do you want to be a father now because your conscience is bothering you?" He took a deep breath. "I do, because I see that there's a part of me here that I don't know. And maybe, if I get the chance, I can still do something right in this life." Luciana didn't answer immediately. She got up, went to a room, and returned with 3 school notebooks. She handed them to him. "These are their drawings, their homework, their grades. Start here, see who they are. Then you decide if you have the courage to continue." Alejandro took the notebooks carefully, as if they were treasures. He sat down again and began to flip through them. He saw doodles of castles, essays in crooked handwriting, poorly done math problems, but full of effort. In that simplicity, he discovered an entire universe he had never known. And at that moment, he understood lost time cannot be recovered, but it can be honored. In the following days, Alejandro began to visit the land frequently. He would show up unannounced, sometimes with books, sometimes with fruits, sometimes just in silence. Gradually, the children grew accustomed to the presence of the man who until then had been a stranger. The oldest, Santiago, was the most reserved, watching him warily, as if he had inherited his mother's caution. Meanwhile, the twins, Leo and Tomas, seemed more open. They asked about his car, about the expensive watch he wore, and laughed at the stories Alejandro told in a stiff but genuine manner. Luciana observed everything from a distance. She didn't interfere, but she also didn't make it easy. She knew that rebuilding something wasn't a matter of days, and that regret only has value when it turns into action. Alejandro started getting involved in small things. He took Santiago to school on a rainy day, helped Luciana fix the makeshift fence in the yard, bought a new ball for the boys, not as a gift, but simply because the old one was deflated. These were simple gestures but full of meaning, and for the first time, he felt that his presence had real value. On a Sunday afternoon, they all sat down together for a snack. It was the first time Alejandro shared a table with them. The youngest, Tomas, between bites, innocently asked, "Are you going to live with us now?" Luciana went silent. Alejandro looked at her before answering. "Not yet, son, but if Mommy allows it, maybe I can come more often. How about that?" Tomas nodded enthusiastically. Santiago said nothing, but he also didn't leave the table, which was already progress. In that moment, Alejandro realized winning the love of a child is very different from closing a contract, and much harder. The following Monday, Alejandro did something no one expected. He held a press conference in front of the land. With journalists, cameras, and microphones, he publicly announced that the shopping center construction was cancelled. Instead, a social housing project for vulnerable families would be developed, with Luciana as the architectural project coordinator. "It's the least I can do," he said, looking at the children beside their mother. The impact was immediate. Some said it was marketing, others claimed it was all his fault. But he didn't care. For the first time, his decision wasn't made to impress anyone. It was meant to repair, albeit belatedly, what he had destroyed in silence. The news spread quickly. Alejandro Torres, the concrete magnate, giving up $1 million shopping center to build public housing. No one believed it at first. But when the construction began and the ED engineers arrived without their expensive suits, with simple plans and sustainable materials, the community realized he was serious. Even more so when they saw Luciana at the helm, hard hat on her head and clipboard in hand, coordinating every meter of dignity that would rise there. Alejandro, for his part, participated without taking center stage. He helped, but left the spotlight to the one who had always deserved it. His relationship with the children remained under construction. Sometimes, Alejandro got his tone wrong, trying to approach them as if he were a hero who had just arrived. And Santiago, especially, made it clear, "You're not a hero, you're someone who disappeared." It hurt to hear that from a child, but Alejandro learned to listen without retorting. Gradually, he realized that their love couldn't be bought or won with grand gestures. It was built in the details, in time, in consistency. It was necessary to show up at school meetings, remember the teachers' names, know that one of them hated carrots while another was afraid of thunder. On a rainy night, Luciana knocked on the door of the small house that Alejandro now rented near the community. She was wet, tired, with deep, dark circles under her eyes. "I didn't come to fight," she said. "I came to tell you that you're doing well." Alejandro was left speechless. She continued, "Not for the projects, but for what you're trying to be on the inside." And she pointed to her own chest. It was the first time they embraced since the reunion. No kisses, no promises, just an embrace between two people who survived each other's absence and who were now learning to respect the space that pain had left. Their relationship never returned to a romance, and perhaps it never would. But a partnership was born there based on something that had never really existed between them: respect. Luciana no longer saw Alejandro as an enemy, but as someone who, albeit late, chose to face the consequences of his own actions. And that, for her, was worth more than flowers, cars, or apologies. As for the children, they still tested boundaries, demanded his presence, asked hard questions. But what Alejandro appreciated most was being there to listen, because now, at least, he had the chance to answer. Time passed, and with it came the most subtle proofs, the ones that don't involve spotlights, but consistency. Alejandro started picking up the children from school twice a week, even when his schedule was tight. He learned to cook rice without burning it, to tie shoelaces in a way that the twins liked, and even to build models with Santiago, who dreamed of becoming an engineer. He no longer needed to impress anyone. He just wanted to be present. And the more he got involved in those small moments, the more he realized how much he had lost and how much he could still live. At one of the community meetings, a resident raised her hand and said, "Mr. Torres, I never thought I'd say this, but thank you for not giving up on fixing what you yourself broke." He lowered his head, moved by emotion. Not because he sought applause, but because those words showed that perhaps he was finally on the right path. Luciana, beside him, just watched. She knew there was still much to be done, not only in social projects, but within the family itself. But now she saw in Alejandro someone who listened, who asked questions, who admitted his mistakes, and that for her was real progress. One evening, during an impromptu dinner, Tomas asked the question no one expected. "Daddy, why did it take you so long to find us?" Silence fell over the table. Alejandro took a deep breath. He looked at each of the children. "Because I was a coward, and because I only thought of myself. But every day, since I saw you on that land, I tried to be less of what I was, and more of what you deserve." It wasn't the perfect answer, but it was the truth. And it was enough for Tomas to come over and hug his father tightly. In that gesture, Alejandro felt that he was beginning to be forgiven. That was when he understood. It's not about erasing the past, but about facing it and doing things differently in the present. The pain he caused would never be forgotten, but it could be transformed into the foundation for something new, something more human. Santiago's eyes, still wary, no longer held anger. Luciana no longer frowned when she saw him arrive. And the twins, well, they now naturally called him Dad. Alejandro knew he wouldn't get another chance to start from scratch. But he also knew that even if he began in the middle, it was still possible to build something whole. The following months were marked by visible changes, but also by silent transformations. Alejandro, once known for being cold and untouchable, was now addressed by his first name on the community streets. The children recognized him as the dad of the triplets, and the adults as the man who didn't run from his own shadow. He no longer drove armored cars, nor made a point of wearing expensive watches. His values had changed. The luxury he once used as armor now felt empty, because for the first time he felt pride not in what he possessed, but in what he was building with his own hands. Luciana watched it all with attentive eyes, but with her feet firmly on the ground. She knew that real transformation takes time, and that the memory of his absence would still echo in some of the children's attitudes. But she also knew how to recognize effort, and Alejandro was trying, truly, not as someone seeking applause, but as someone who understood what he had caused and was willing to endure the discomfort of making amends. One night, while watching the children sleep after a day full of activities, she whispered, "They like you, but they're still afraid you'll leave again." Alejandro replied firmly, "I won't." Months later, the new housing complex was completed. Simple houses, but well-structured, with green spaces nearby, schools, and communal areas. Luciana made a point of naming the project Races, Roots, because, according to her, it's where everything begins and what sustains you when the winds blow hard. At the inauguration, Alejandro made no speech. He simply handed over the keys to a mother with 2 children and left discreetly, accompanied by his own kids. He no longer needed to show off. He no longer needed to prove anything. That silent gesture spoke louder than 1,000 words at a microphone. On the way home, Santiago walked alongside him. He didn't say much, as usual, but before entering the gate, he stopped and said, "You're not perfect yet, but you're trying. And that is something." Alejandro smiled, moved. "It's all I can be for now, son, but I'm here, and I'm not going anywhere." The boy nodded, without hugs or tears, but with something stronger: trust. And at that moment, Alejandro understood that the greatest wealth he had ever achieved in life was found in the small things. And that sometimes a true home isn't where you arrive, it's where you decide to stay. A year later, Alejandro was writing in his notebook, a habit he picked up from Santiago, who loved to record his own thoughts. On the cover, he wrote, "Things that matter." There were no profit goals or expansion plans inside. There were names, dates, first words, drawings by his children, and phrases spoken by Luciana that he never wanted to forget. It was his way of ensuring that memory would never fail again, of keeping alive what he had almost lost due to pride. And every time he reread those pages, he felt that despite everything, it was still possible to honor the life he had let slip away. On a quiet Sunday afternoon, Alejandro and Luciana sat on a bench in the newly built square with their children playing in front. She held a book. He, a cup of coffee. Neither said much, but the silence between them now was light. It was peace. Not as a couple, but as two adults who had managed to survive the storm and come out the other side with scars and not walls. "Thank you for coming back, even without an invitation," she said. Alejandro looked at the children, then at her. "Thank you for not closing the door." And both understood the weight and value of that exchange. And so, on a plot of land where he once saw only profit, Alejandro found what he had never had: roots, family, and redemption. He didn't change the world, nor erase the past, but he changed himself, and that by itself was a revolution. Because in the end, true greatness isn't about building empires, but about having the courage to return and rebuild what was abandoned. And to love, even when you're not sure you'll be accepted. Alejandro learned that love doesn't demand perfect presence. It requires consistency. And he was willing now to stay until the end. Phrase of the day: we cannot change the beginning of the story, but we can always choose a new ending. Even when everything seems lost, there's still time to rebuild with presence, truth, and love. If this story touched your heart, subscribe to the channel, leave a like, hit the bell, and tell us which city you're watching from. Your participation is what drives us to continue sharing real, human, and deeply moving stories. Thank you for being here.